Welcome everyone to the second video on the Calico Network Policy Introduction series. So we're going to start off with the first policy example. And the first example was a deny list policy. For those of you who have access to this staged environment, as you look at the policies board, make sure that you have only selected the policy examples tier. Okay. So if there are any other tiers, just unselect those tiers and make sure you only have selected the policy examples tier. All right. So the deny list policy. Let's look at what we have in this policy. So the name of the policy is deny list. Okay. And the policy applies to a set of endpoints, and I've used a namespace selector, and in this case the selector is customer equals true. Okay, so it's a global network policy, which means it can cut across multiple namespaces in the cluster, and I have selected namespaces with a label customer equals true. Okay, now if you're interested in seeing the workloads scoped or selected as part of this policy, in the UI there is an endpoints, and you can click on the endpoints, and that's then going to show you the endpoints or workloads scoped as part of this policy. Okay, and it appears that I have endpoints in two namespaces: policy example app1 and policy example app2 scoped as part of this policy. Basically, these namespaces have the label custom equals true, and as a result, workloads in these namespaces were selected as part of the policy. Okay. All right, so I'm selecting my customer workloads, so to speak, and in this policy, I have ingress and egress rules. And I'm basically denying any traffic to endpoints, to a network set, and the network set in this case has a label embargo equals true. Okay, and I'm using a global network set, and that's why in the rule I have a global scope. Okay, and similarly on the egress direction, I'm denying traffic to endpoints embargo equals true. I'm referencing a network set, and that network set has a global scope. Okay, so this takes us to network sets. So let's look at what network sets are. In the UI, there's an option for network sets. If you click on that, you should see a few network sets, and in this case I have a network set called embargo hyphen countries, and within the network set I have a label, embargo equals true, and we saw this label being referenced in the policy rules. Okay, and I also have a set of networks or CIDR ranges. In this case, you could also add FQDNs to a network set. Okay, now my network set is global, and what that means is I can reference this network set for policies referencing basically any namespace. Okay, it's not bound to a namespace. Now a network set could have a namespace scope as well, in which case when I'm referencing the network set, it has to be within the scope of that namespace. Okay, but in my case, I've defined a global network set, and what that means is it's not bound to a namespace. I can pretty much reference the network set in any rule that has a global scope. Okay, and we saw that the rules we had defined in the previous policy had a global scope. Okay, and the UI also mentions any policy that is currently referencing this network set. In my case, I have the deny list policy in the policy examples tier. It's a global policy, referencing this network set. So let's go back to the policy and revisit the policy. So just to recap, I am denying traffic from the IP addresses that I've identified as countries with embargoes, and I'm referencing a network set to do so, and that network set has a global scope. And I'm also denying traffic to those IP addresses. And in this case, I'm also referencing the same network set that has a global scope. Okay. So for those of you who prefer looking at, let's say, a YAML manifest, this is what it looks like. This is a global network policy, and this is the name of the policy. The policy is in the policy examples tier, and it is a deny list policy. We've specified the tier, in this case, policy examples. And although it's a global network policy with a global scope, I am using a namespace selector to select a set of workloads, and in this case the selector is customer equals true, and I have an ingress rule with a denying traffic from the IP addresses or CIDRs in this network set. I'm referencing the network set using this label embargo equals true, and the network set has a global scope, and that's why I'm using a global namespace selector here. Okay. If the network set was a regular network set with a namespace scope, I would have to specify the namespace in the rule. Okay. And I'm denying traffic to all destinations scoped or selected as part of this policy, which are workloads in namespaces with this label. Okay. The same logic on the egress direction. I'm denying traffic to these IP addresses and from all workloads. Source is all workloads selected as part of this policy. Okay. So this is the first policy example. Now, if I go to the service graph, and for those of you who have access to this stage environment, there is a view called policy introduction. You can click on this view, and that's then going to show you the two namespaces scoped as part of that policy. And we see that in one of the namespaces, we have a workload, and in this case, it's a workload called a rogue. It's a rogue pod, and we see it trying to connect to an IP address which was in or within a CIDR specified in the network set. Now you can click on this flow, and that's then gonna give you further information, or rather the flow logs associated with that flow. You can click on the flow log, and we can see that the flow was denied. In this case, it was going to this particular IP address. And you can also identify the process. In this case, it was a curl that was initiating traffic to that particular IP address, which was denied by the deny list policy. Okay. All right. So that's it for this video. We looked at the first policy example. In the next video, we will look at the second policy example, which is a namespace isolation policy. So I'll see you in the next video. Thank you.